So, welcome everybody to our the Norwalk Partnerships event called "How Are Our Families Doing?" I'm Margaret Watt. I work for Positive Directions as the prevention director, and one of the things that I have the pleasure of doing is being one of the leadership team of the Norwalk Partnership, which is sponsoring this event tonight. And the folks that you're going to hear from are all connected to the Norwalk Partnership. So it is truly a partnership. We are a community coalition consisting of parents, several of us are parents in town, professionals, organizations working together with the mission of preventing substance misuse among Norwalk youth and young adults. And one of the things that we've been able to do through our joint work, which really got going last year when we kind of reformulated this partnership, is we conducted a survey in the community of adults last March. And then in June, right at the end of the school year, we were able to conduct a survey among our students in middle and high school in Norwalk. And our data is really robust because we surveyed a lot of kids. So tonight's presentation is intended to share some of what we learned with everybody, but in a way where you get to hear from some of the many, many resources that Norwalk has to help our families if people are struggling with things like stress and mental health and substance use, which are some of the things we surveyed about. And those are some of the focal areas we want to talk about tonight. But really the takeaway should be, we all know what a tough time it's been during COVID. Everyone's been struggling. The struggle is real, but Norwalk is so rich in resources and there are so many agencies out here that are available to help. So you're going to hear from some of them tonight. We're going to tell you how to access help. There will be a Q&A at the end and opportunities during the presentation to ask questions. Plus, we can share this recording with everyone afterwards or anyone who's not here. So I just said all this. I just didn't show the screen in time. Tonight, we're presenting our Norwalk survey findings with support from our community partners to share strategies and resources. So this is what we're going to do tonight. First, we're going to focus on mental health, then on being LGBTQ, because the kids who are in that population showed up as having certain risk factors in our data, and we really want to help demystify what that really means, and that it's not a problem. But that supports may be needed for kids and families and that they're available. We're going to talk about what our substance use data show, and then, signs and symptoms that it's time to seek help. We've got a nice quick little video on that and where to get help. What I want you all to know is for presentations 2 through 5, people that you see right here on the screen have already pre-recorded some of that content. So you'll be able to watch their video clip and then chat with them in real time if you have questions or comments. Just use the chat to ask them questions. They will answer directly. If it's a bigger question, a longer question, we'll leave it to the very end when we'll just turn off the cameras and be able to talk to you about whatever you want to know. So we're now going to start with our mental health presentation by Gail Melanson from Child Guidance, Mid-Fairfield Child Guidance, and Danique Vitamin-Lewis from Norwalk ACTS.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gail Melanson, and I'm the Executive Director of Mid-Fairfield Child Guidance Center.
And I'm Danique Vitamin-Lewis, Director of Equity and Collaborative Action at Norwalk ACTS.
Tonight, we're here to talk with you about mental health and to share some statistics about the Norwalk community. So let's start with talking about what is mental health and why is it important. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, how we relate to others, and make healthy choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood and adolescence through adulthood. Most often, we recognize the importance of physical health, exercising, eating healthy, drinking water, going to the doctor regularly. While physical health does play a large role in keeping our bodies in shape and functioning properly, our mental health is just as important to maintain and achieve a healthy and happy lifestyle. Unfortunately, most people don't pay as much attention to monitoring and taking care of their mental health. Often there's a stigma associated with mental health. But going to see a therapist or taking other steps to ensure you are functioning optimally with your mental health should be just as acceptable as going for your yearly physical or going to the gym to maintain your physical health. Danique is going to talk a little bit about some of the statistics around mental health and different symptoms.
Thank you, Gail. So locally, what we know from the data that was taken in June 2021, 41% of teens in grades 7 through 12 reported having stronger relationships with their families. And 8% reported weaker relationships with their family. Subsequently, also 27% of Norwalk adults reported better relationships with their family and friends, and the same amount same percentage, 27% reported worse relationships. Also, 61% of young people also did not feel connected to other kids at school. So this is definitely some of the impacts that we've seen based on living through a global pandemic and its impact on relationships. Additionally, when we're talking about how stress and anxiety has affected the Norwalk community, 43% or almost half of adults have said that COVID negatively affected their emotional well-being, especially based on financial strain. 34% or about a third of adults also reported high anxiety. 73% of young people, so almost 3 out of 4, reported that COVID was somewhat or very stressful for them. So needless to say, if it was stressful for adults, then this definitely also affected our young people. And recognizing that only a third of young people, 30%, reached out to others. So also this 30% or 70% of an opportunity for us as we continue to move hopefully past the pandemic, to continue to build stronger relationships within our family units, within our school community, as well as the community at large. We also want to recognize, based on the local data, that we know that depression and suicide is present. And we also know that depression is a common mental health condition. 32% of our middle schoolers and 46% of our high schoolers have reported signs of depression based on the pandemic. 30% of Norwalk adults also reported high rates of depression. Additionally, 13% of teens reported suicidal thoughts or ideation, and 6% of young people reported having at least one suicide attempt. So recognizing that suicide is a serious issue, and that we also want this to be an opportunity to talk about national resources. So also on your screen, there are 2 resources in front of you. One of which is the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which can be called, you can do a chat, you can go on their website, but really making sure that this is a number that everyone has readily accessible to them. 1-800-273-TALK or 8255. This is a national resource available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is also our National Veterans Crisis Line. So if you are a veteran or calling on behalf of a veteran, you would dial 1. Also, another resource, recognizing that our younger generations text more than they talk, is also the Crisis Text Line, which is also a national resource. So you can text home, you can text CT, you can text hello to 741-741, which are all of the digits on the left side of your cell phone. So also a wonderful resource, especially for those who may be thinking of suicide and may need someone to support them and to be able to assist them to receive the much help that is readily available for them.
So after hearing all this information, you're probably wondering, when do I seek help for my child? When would I seek help for myself? And what's important to recognize is that everyone has mood fluctuations. Everybody gets sad or angry or anxious. Individuals procrastinate, they become forgetful. It's all perfectly normal. It's part of growing up, it's part of developing. And the question becomes, when does it change from being typical and perfectly normal to, should I be seeking help or getting an assessment? So the main rule of thumb is when the unhealthy behaviors or unhealthy emotional states persist and begin to negatively impact your ability or your child's ability to function in one or more settings. So either within the family, at school, at work, or in the community, then you would consider seeking professional help. You have to remember it's extremely common for children to need help with mental health issues and nothing to be embarrassed about, or for yourself. In fact, 1 in 5 children in the US has a diagnosable mental health condition that requires treatment. And you have to also keep in mind that 5 in 5 individuals have mental health. Everyone has mental health. So if you look at the mental health continuum model on your screen, it goes from healthy to illness. And it's considered a continuum because people may be at different places along the continuum at different points in their life. So the healthy part of the continuum would be normal mood changes, you have a sense of humor, you're performing well, your eating and sleeping patterns are fine, you're socially active, and you have a good energy level. And then slowly it might go to the ailing or illness place where you might have frequent anger, feelings of hopelessness, sadness that's lingering, poor concentration, eating or sleeping might be abnormal or disturbed, all the way to the illness part where you might be experiencing, or your child might be experiencing, aggression, angry outbursts, depressed moods, suicidal thoughts, difficulty performing either in school or at work, inappropriate behaviors, fatigue, social withdrawal, self-injury, or panic attacks. So if you or your child are exhibiting any of the behaviors or symptoms described in the ailing or the illness zones of mental health continuum, then we would recommend you seek professional help. Early intervention is critical. You don't necessarily want to wait till it goes from ailing to illness. If you start to see signs where it's going down to the other part of the continuum, you would seek help. A healthy mind is as important to a child's development as a healthy body. Mental health plays a critical role in shaping a child's social, emotional, and cognitive development. A mental health professional can introduce treatment and therapies that can help your child live a happier, healthier, safer, and more productive life. When we think about the highest risk groups, we look at different populations. So in terms of higher rates of depression, 43% of Black, Hispanic, and English language learner students have higher rates of depression. Also, 45% of students in special ed and 46% of multiracial students, also higher rates of depression, and 49% of girls are experiencing depression. The highest group is the LGBTQ population. They have 70% of the population are displaying symptoms of depression, and 20% of the population have had a suicide attempt. And Cadence will talk more about that particular population.
Thank you, Gail and Danique. So now we're going to hear from Cadence to explain a little bit about the LGBTQ piece.
So my name is Cadence Pentheny, and I work as the community educator here at Triangle Community Center in Norwalk. And I wanted to provide a little bit of information about what it means to be LGBTQ+, because that is what I do in my work. I really believe that we know how to support people better when we know what they might actually be experiencing and what they're going through. So to be LGBTQ+ means different things for different people, but the term is used as this acronym that stands for people of all different kinds of identities who experience marginalization for their sexuality and for their gender identity. And I want to tell you a little bit more about what those pieces mean. Gender identity is a term that I just used. So your gender identity, a person's gender identity, is their deeply personal internal sense or feelings of what their own gender is. And for some people that matches up with what they were assigned or what was assumed of them, which I'll talk about in just a second. But that's not the case for everyone. So it is just your deeply personal, internal held sense of self when it comes to what your own gender is, right? So that's not something that's visible to other people. You know what that is. Again, if for you it has always been something that matches up with what people have assumed of you or assigned to you when you were born, you just maybe haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it. But for a lot of folks, especially in our younger generations, when they're being more open about these feelings, that's not always the case. So when we hear people, self-describe themselves with terms like female, woman, girl, non-binary, that's someone who doesn't identify as either being male or female, a woman or a man, somewhere along any spectrum, right? If you're someone, refer to themselves using language such as male, man, boy, what they're really referring to is their gender identity, that deeply personal internal sense of self. So that's the key piece to remember about gender identity, is that's the inside of how you feel. Again, everyone gets to decide what that gender identity is for themselves. It's deeply personal. Can also change over time, right? Again, this is not the case for everyone, but this is why we see young people coming into these experiences and beginning to talk about them more, because they're figuring out who they are in all senses of the self. We just tend to make a big idea about it when it's about gender, when it doesn't have to be. Again, there's so many different identity terms that a person can choose to use, and they can, mean different things for different people, even who use the same term. And not everyone uses any term at all. It's okay to feel overwhelmed by all of this, because again, it's not new. People have always had these experiences. We're just able to talk about them more openly. And our young people definitely are as well, talking about these things more openly. And it's always okay to say, what does that mean for you? If someone identifies with a term, you are not expected to know everything there is. As long as you, ask in a way that is affirming, that's always okay. So as I mentioned, for a long, long time, and still really today, most of us have probably been taught that there are only two options when it comes to people's sex when they were born: male or female, right? And we base this around what our body parts look like when they're born, and our specific body parts, right, our genitalia. our sex is about way more than just that. It's a very incomplete picture to base it on just that, what our physical external body parts look like. There are so many different pieces when it comes to physical sex, biological sex, that makes us who we are. And we're really just starting to talk about what that diversity looks like. So just as there is this huge amount of diversity in how we think and feel, there is just as much diversity in our bodies and our biology. Is every single exact thing about two people who were assigned female at birth going to be exactly the same when we're looking at things like hormones, their chromosomes, even, their brain chemistry, all of these different pieces. It's not just about what genitalia looks like. In fact, intersex people exist and have always existed. So someone who is intersex is someone who is born with any variety of characteristics that don't put them into being in the strict male or female box. So again, it's just so important that we talk about this as well. It's a much more diverse field, again, when it comes to our physical selves, just as there is with our mental and emotional selves. Again, society tells us that our bodies or genitalia always have to match with our gender identity. For some people, that is the case. Again, if you're someone who has not spent a lot of time worrying or thinking about this, you're probably one of those people who this matches for. But there are many folks who feel that their bodies are separate from their gender. Again, we also continue to change, grow, and develop throughout our entire lives. That really doesn't end for any of us. Aging changes your body. Anything that you do can change your body, but instead we make it a big deal when it's something related to gender. So it's important that we disrupt that when we're thinking about support. Gender expression. So I think of gender identity as the internal piece. Gender expression is any of the more external things that we might be doing to express ourselves when perhaps it relates back to our gender. So clothing is a huge thing that people think of, whether or not we wear makeup, paint our nails, how we wear our hair, even our body language and the way we speak and interact, the roles that we take on in our family and our workplaces. All of that can be really based around gender, and that's all visible to the world around us. So all of those pieces relate back to gender expression. And again, there's a lot that goes into this, and we as human beings are the ones who decided what is for boys and what is for girls, right? We decided that pink is the girl color and blue is the boy color. That just doesn't exist in the world. Again, a lot of the time, these rules are helpful for us because they allow us to sort and make sense of the world around us, but it's super not helpful for the people who don't fit into those boxes, right? So it's really important that we recognize that there's a spectrum to all of these things. Again, there's someone who identifies as being non-binary, right? Someone who doesn't identify as being male or female. They might look feminine, they might look masculine, they might be androgynous, but that might not have anything to do with their gender identity. Again, there are men who are feminine. There are women who are masculine, right? And androgynous and everywhere in between. So we also have to disrupt this idea that our outside always has to match the inside, because how do you match a feeling all of the time? That can be much more complicated than maybe we've been taught. Different groups and cultures also all have different ideas of what it means to be masculine or feminine, androgynous. Again, we as people don't have all the same thoughts and opinions, so it's very relative depending what group we're a part of. Again, our expression also changes over the course of our lives. And one thing that, many people struggle with is our gender expression. How we would really love to look is often guided by our feelings of safety and acceptance. So even though we might really feel more comfortable personally and internally dressing and presenting in a certain way, we might not be able to in order to live in a world which will treat us in ways that we need to be treated and that we will be safe in. So that's a really difficult internal thing to have to deal with. So sexuality is another huge piece of this, and again, interconnected with gender, but doesn't always match up either, right? So sexuality or sexual orientation is about who a person might be attracted to, might be interested in getting involved with sexually, and what that attraction looks like. Again, people experience sexual attraction in all different kinds of ways to all different kinds of people, or even not at all. It's also a perfectly normal experience to not really be interested in anyone, which again is another thing we don't get to talk about a lot. Terms like gay, straight, lesbian, queer, bisexual, and asexual all refer to sexuality. And again, sometimes sexuality is related to expression. Maybe you're attracted to femininity. Maybe you're attracted to masculinity. Doesn't always match up with the exact gender of a person, right? Again, our young folks are starting to talk about these experiences in a much more fluid and diverse way than maybe many of us are used to hearing or thinking about, right? So another thing, it's always okay to ask respectfully, what does that mean for you, right? If a young person or anyone expresses their feelings or their identity to you as well. This is also not even talking about, romantic attraction, which it can be another whole spectrum, not just about, sex and sexuality, right? Who we feel romantic or emotional attraction to is also another whole piece. So now we have a little bit of an overview. Why are LGBTQ plus youth struggling? Why do we see them overrepresented in our data when we've talked about mental health and substance misuse? And it's really important that we really name that LGBTQ plus people are not struggling because of who they are, but due to the negative treatment they are experiencing just for that, right? And this treatment is almost always both direct, so they're experiencing firsthand bullying and discrimination and violence and these things happening to them, or even just perceived, right? Because we live in a world in which we're constantly inundated with this information. So it could just be this constant messaging about society's general non-acceptance or violence towards sexual and gender minorities and people who have been minoritized in all sorts of different ways. So none of these identities or experiences are a choice, and it's really important that we name that. Again, especially when we see people, especially our young folks, struggling, if they're struggling so much, why would they choose to have this experience if it was a choice, right? So it's really always important that we remember that, as well as that there are no right or wrong ways to have an identity in general. And really, it's just about supporting a person, making sure that they can be safely who they are. And that is really how we talk about all of these things.
That was great, Cadence. Thank you so much. And I wanted to mention for the audience that actually, it's not just that our data showed that the kids who identified as LGBTQ were suffering from the effects of discrimination and stigma and sort of negative treatment that Cadence just explained. But also it's really important to know that a very large percent of the kids that we surveyed in middle and high school don't identify as straight. In fact, only about 70% of our kids identify as straight, and 18% specifically identify as LGBT, with another, I think, 6% identifying as, Q, questioning, or other. And so really we're talking about a lot of kids, and that's why this awareness is so important for our families. One of the things to think about is, are we asking our kids what pronouns they want to use? Are we respectful of that, etc.? So moving on, we're going to look at our substance use information from the survey. And Donna Fletcher from Mid-Fairfield Child Guidance is going to present this. And I can answer any questions you have about the data in the chat while she presents.
Good afternoon. My name is Donna Fletcher, and I'm the Director of Co-occurring Treatment Programs at the Child and Family Guidance Center. Today, I'm here to talk to you about substance use in Norwalk.
I'm not sure you're seeing the right screen, so I'm going to try to pause this. Hang on. Oh, there it is.
We, in particular, are looking at the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on substance use among youth. According to national statistics, drug use remained at the same level at both pre-pandemic and during the pandemic in June 2021. However, drug use actually declined significantly in December 2021. And we ask ourselves why. Some youth experience loneliness and isolation and turn to drugs and alcohol to cope during the pandemic, while other youth have done better because they tend to be anxious in school and in social situations. These youth experienced actually a reduced need to use drugs and alcohol. So the good news is that substance and alcohol use actually declined between June and December of 2021. And this is evidenced by our local Norwalk data that we collected, as well as by the national data. And this reflects basically a protective effect from the pandemic, where kids have had fewer social occasions and less access to substances during the pandemic. And here's some US statistics of substance use before and during the pandemic. So for example, marijuana use. Before the pandemic, 23% of students said that they had used marijuana in the past 30 days, compared to 20% during the pandemic. Likewise, for alcohol use, youth reported that they binge drank 17% in pre-pandemic times versus 13% during the pandemic. And finally, nicotine and vaping also went from 24% pre-pandemic to 17% during the pandemic. So we see a decrease actually in substance use. These are national statistics. So this chart tells us more about, in specifics, the substance use of youth in Norwalk, based upon November 2018 youth survey by Positive Directions. So important things to note from this chart are that youth will start using substances as early as the 7th grade. And we see this rise well up until the 12th grade. Alcohol remains the #1 substance of choice. Other notable things to pull off of this chart is the fact that substance use has basically been reduced in the Norwalk area. And also, most of the kids are really not using, so that's good news. Among students who drink, we find that they have a propensity to use other drugs such as vaping or marijuana. So there's a correlation between alcohol use and use of other drugs. In addition, higher rates occur within the LGBTQ communities, students with depression, special education needs, financial strain in the family, and girls. Here we have some information about adult substance use in Norwalk in particular. And again, good news is that during the pandemic, there was equally people using less alcohol, less nicotine, less marijuana, and prescription drugs for the purposes of getting high to feel good, just about at the same rate as those using more of the same drugs. So there was a balancing of the two. So there really was not an overall increase among adults of substance use. We also looked at the Norwalk community attitudes and knowledge around substance use, and these were some of our findings. So for adults, 28% think that drinking alcohol is a normal part of growing up. 16% think marijuana is a normal part of growing up. 43% think alcohol consumption is common at Norwalk beaches. 23% think alcohol is common on school grounds during band and sporting events. We also talked to teens about what their attitudes are and knowledge around substance use, and they felt that, well, the statistics say that 23% do not think drinking 5+ drinks at a time, 1 to 2 times per week, is harmful. 35% do not think using marijuana 1 to 2 times per week is harmful. And with regard to the law and practices, 36% of adults are unaware of the social host law. We'll talk about that in a minute. 29% of adults are unaware that the legal age for tobacco, vaping, and drinking is 21. 22 to 23% are unaware of safe storage and disposal for prescription drugs. We also looked at student awareness of the health risks from substance use. And what's noteworthy from this chart is that the use of marijuana 1 to 2 times per week is really, there's remarkably lower levels of awareness as compared to misuse of prescription drugs. And it seems that the awareness seems to drop as youth get older, and these worries are not of such concern for them. Another thing that we looked at was, how does parent and peer disapproval of substances affect student use? So it's very important to note from this chart that the greater the disapproval from parents and peers, the less likely youth will use substances. And here are some facts that you may already know about. We looked at teens versus adults use. Because the teenage brain continues to mature into the 20s, drug use can cause damage to the brain. This may lead to poor academic performance, memory loss, reduction in IQ, irrational decision-making that can lead to negative consequences. Mental health issues may arise, including depression, anxiety, aggression, and stress. And ironically, that though people sometimes use substances and alcohol to help cope with stress, these chemicals, these drugs actually have a rebound effect and can actually increase the levels of mental health issues, stress, aggression, anxiety, etc. Alcohol and drug abuse can harm organs in the human body, including the liver, heart, lungs, brain, and pancreas, among other parts of the human body. And substance users often have weakened immune systems and are much more vulnerable to contracting COVID-19. And there are some sad facts that we know about, that there has been an increase in drug and alcohol overdoses in Connecticut and in the US during the pandemic in the last few years. Also, there has been an increase in suicides connected to drug and alcohol abuse in Connecticut and in the US. So we ask ourselves, what are the best strategies to decrease substance use among youth? So from our data, it seems that reduced access to drugs and alcohol is helpful. And so that means putting away, storing your alcohol, your prescriptive drugs, locking them up. Another important thing to consider is increasing education to develop a greater awareness of the dangers of substance use. And that awareness really has to come from both parents and with youth. And finally, involvement of youth in positive social community activities that are non-drug involving, just helping kids have fun without the need to use drugs and alcohol. And here are some key points around drug use, misuse, and addiction. The legal age for alcohol, vaping, marijuana is 21. These all have negative impact on the developing brain. Alcohol, mostly used by youth, especially during COVID, to socialize. Youth may have access at home. However, the social host law makes parents liable if a youth suffers an accident or injury while or after attending a gathering in their home. So the parents are liable if something happens to those kids. Marijuana. The potency of today's plant in THC concentrates is 90% stronger than the marijuana of the 1970s. Dealers often increase the weight with additives such as glass, sand, rat poisoning, etc., so that they can charge more for their marijuana. Vaping and smoking. These can contain cancer-causing chemicals such as formaldehyde, toluene, nicotine, acrolein, and heavy metals including cadmium, lead, nickel. And tiny particles often travel to the deepest parts of the lungs. The different flavors pose the items as non-harmful, but flavors containing diacetyl, a chemical linked to lung disease, can be found in these. 1 joule pod is equivalent to 41 cigarettes. Defective e-cigarettes, batteries can cause physical harm as well. Prescription drugs and opioids. These are highly addictive substances. Youth start to obtain them from medicine cabinets at home. If they continue to need more and become addicted psychologically and physically, they may turn to either heroin or to counterfeit street narcotics. These may contain other substances, including fentanyl or carfentanil. Fentanyl can be extremely dangerous and can lead to overdose. Fentanyl has been found in all drugs, including marijuana. And I just heard something on the news the other day where several youth were sent to the hospital after ingesting candy that had been laced with fentanyl. So fentanyl is everywhere. So here are some signs and symptoms of drug use. So in terms of physical manifestations, things like skin lesions, bloody or watery eyes, a faint skin odor, sudden weight loss or weight gain, easily fatigued or constantly fatigued, hyperexcitability, speech pattern changes, slurred speech, runny or irritated nose. In terms of behavioral, you may see a drop in attendance or performance at work or at school. There may be unexplained financial problems. Maybe there's somebody who's borrowing or stealing money. Engaging in secretive or suspicious behaviors. Forgetfulness, sudden change of friends, different hangouts and hobbies. Frequently getting into trouble, getting into fights, accidents, or illegal activities. Environmental symptoms include a distinct or pungent odor, a possession of illicit drugs or excessive alcohol. Check their bedrooms. Possession of needles, balloons, wrappers, pipes, capsules, folded paper envelopes. And psychological, unexplained changes in personality or attitude, sudden mood swings, irritability or angry outbursts, periods of unusual hyperactivity, agitation, giddiness, lack of motivation, appearing fearful, anxious, paranoid, and mental health diagnosis, treatment history. What can you do to help your child stay sober? Monitor your child's behavior and whereabouts. Know where they're at. Talk early, talk often, talk openly, and really try to get an understanding of the thoughts and feelings of your youth. Validate what they're feeling. Keep your own drugs and alcohol locked up. Be a good role model and use substances responsibly. Be positive with your child and praise appropriate behavior. Decrease blaming and put downs. Get involved in your child's life outside of the home. Encourage and promote positive social and recreational activities. And do you know that Norwalk has many resources that can help? We have the school-based health centers where there are psychologists, social workers, nurses who can talk to your students. We have many places that provide community counseling, and such as my own, the Child and Family Guidance Center. I run a program called STRI. That stands for Substance Screening, Treatment, and Recovery for Youth. Liberation programs, positive directions, recovery network of programs. These are all places where your child can receive counseling. Youth Services Bureau, that's another place that can coordinate services for your youth. There are a lot of free self-help places your child can go. Al-Anon, Alateen, smart recovery groups for youth and their families and friends. CCAR recovery coaching and telephone recovery support. And of course, you know about 211, where they can receive emergency mobile crisis services, and of course, 911. Don't wait. Please know that we're there for you, and we wish all the very best for you and your families. Thank you.
That was great, Donna. Thank you so much. Ed, should I just play the video about warning signs, or do you want to talk first?
I'll introduce myself, but what a wealth. I'm so honored to be here. Just packed with information. Sometimes all this information can be overwhelming, and we have an expert team here to assist in getting help, in getting support. And I hope, I work with everyone here and I'm familiar, but I'm just beyond impressed with what we have available for our youth, for our families, for our community. And here's another tool we're going to show you right now. Signs of when it's time, this is from NAMI, when it's time to seek help.
Mental health conditions are more common than you may think. 1 in 5 youth or young adults lives with a mental health condition. Do you know the warning signs? Like feeling sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks. Severe mood swings that cause problems in relationships. Intense worries or fears that get in the way of daily activities. Sudden overwhelming fear for no reason. Or seriously trying to harm or kill oneself, or making plans to do so. Not eating, throwing up, or using laxatives to lose weight. Significant weight loss or weight gain. Severe, out-of-control risk-taking behavior that can cause harm to self or others. Repeated use of drugs or alcohol. Drastic changes in behavior, personality, or sleeping habits. Or extreme difficulty concentrating or staying still. If you see these signs in yourself or a friend, tell a trusted adult. The first step to getting help is to say it out loud.
Okay, back to you, Ed.
Thank you, Margaret. This flyer, I think, is just maybe not as pretty as we'd like, but it is so informative, and I hope that every Norwalk family has the opportunity to download this from the Norwalk Partnership, hang it up, because it's just such a wealth of information. we are blessed to be in a community that's rich in resources, and I can see sometimes that might be overwhelming. We're here to help you through that process. And again, we do the data, we get the information. We know that 30% of our teens have reached out for support, and we're trying to make supports even more readily available to our youth, to our community. I'm with a program called Kids in Crisis. We have our Teen Talk programs in both high schools. We are available for kids. No appointment needed. Everything's confidential, as a resource in that crisis phase. Often our work is connecting kids and families with long-term supports, counseling, and we are blessed to have counseling options directly in the school. We have a school-based health center that we can refer to, and we also have Mid-Fairfield Child Guidance that is providing counseling to our students in both high schools. So again, there's a lot of support out there. We're here to help you through the process. I'm certainly going to give a plug for Kids in Crisis. We have a helpline that's available for kids and families that's very well used by our Norwalk community. That number is 661-1911, and that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. To support our kids and our families. Again, I think tonight was so amazing, so informative, so rich, and we are really lucky to be in a community that values our families, values our students, our parents, and is data driven by having all this fantastic data so that we can meet the needs of our community. So I do feel lucky, and I think we're ready for question and answer, right?
I think so. Ed, thank you. I'm just going to add that was Ed Milton from Kids in Crisis. And as he pointed out, you can download this guide from the norwalkpartnership.org Get Help. But also on that page, you can just read in more detail about any of these programs. What I do want to point out is, if it's the middle of the night and you don't know who to call a hotline. If it's daytime and you want to figure out who to call and you don't want to go through this guide, call Norwalk Community Services right here. We also put it on the top of this screen here, and they'll walk you through the process. But all these nonprofit treatment agencies are right here in town. If you don't want to stay in Norwalk, you can go over here to the hubct.org, where I'm pointing on the screen, and find services in other towns. But each of these descriptions tells you whether the agency serves mental health or substance, teens or adults. They're all willing to take sliding fee scale, different types of insurance, undocumented. We're really trying to make sure that resources are available. And so at this point, we have completed the presentations. There, I think, has been a little bit of discussion in the chat, and I'm going to go back to where people can see our faces for any questions or comments. But I think I'll stop recording now.